All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Socialist Feminist Speaks Out for Renewable Energy. My name is Christina Lee, and I am excited to welcome you to New Valencia Hall, the home of the Freedom Socialist Party in the Bay Area. The Freedom Socialist Party is a socialist feminist party founded in 1966. We have a long history in the Bay Area of being on the front lines of struggle for the most oppressed communities. In particular, we fought to unite the battles against racism, sexism, homophobia, and working class exploitation into a multi-issue movement. For those of us who are here in person, we're selling snack plates with some very delicious Chinese chicken or tofu salad. And the restrooms are down the hallway. Today, we are ever so lucky to hear from Sam Rubin, who will be talking about how to mitigate the damage done by fossil fuels and what we need to become independent from them and build for a cleaner future. This is important to us as socialist feminists because we workers and the poor suffer the most from the environmental damage caused by capitalist elites. And because we know that it is only by ending capitalism and its endless drive for resources and energy that we'll be able to have a habitable planet. Before that, after that, we'll have a few announcements. And after we hear from Sam, we will have open discussion. And at the end of the event, there will be time for community announcements. The specter of climate change has shifted from the cartoon villains of children's shows like Captain Planet and the Planeteers to the very real polluters responsible for the dramatic ecological disasters we face today, such as capitalism's promoters of overconsumption, like Jeff Bezos, or the US military, which is the world's biggest polluter. As these realities have reached catastrophic proportions, humanity must figure out how to balance our lives and needs for energy with the necessity of transitioning to less destructive forms of power production before it's too late. So Sam Rubin, pronouns they, them, is a disabled, non-binary, socialist, feminist, revolutionary, and author. They were born and raised right here in the city of San Francisco, and they've been actively fighting for environmental justice, healthcare, labor, and more for over 20 years. Their article, Solar and Wind Power Surging While US Doubles Down on Fossil Fuels, was featured in the February-March issue of the Freedom Socialist. Take it away, Sam.
Um, okay, so basically, the I'm at the heart of the issue that I'm talking about today is how the U.S. is refusing to move away from fossil fuels in favor of renewable and clean energy, um, as most of the rest of the world is already doing. Um, and as part of the Trump administration's new budget that was recently passed, their U.S. investment in clean energy has been drastically reduced. Consumer tax credits for solar and wind power are being eliminated too. Um, they're also doing things like at a time when solar power should be, really more widespread, proliferating across the entire country. They're cutting programs, including cutting all the federal help, like funding that they were giving to the Navajo and Hopi nations solar programs, which were very successful. Um, Now they're starting over basically, and this is a significant blow um, to energy growth as domestic demand for electricity. Of course, that continues to rise, putting strain on the system and hurting working class customers or consumers with overburdened and uh, vulnerable energy grids that they have to pay terribly high rates to use. These cuts to green energy, they're so profoundly damaging that the International Energy Agency, or IEA, lowered their projection of US renewable capacity growth by 50% compared to 2024. That's really shocking. Um, by contrast, clean and renewable energy is making great overall gains worldwide outside the US. Um, Several years ago, the world finally reached the point where solar and wind energy has become cheaper on average than fossil fuels. In the first half of 2025, for the first time ever, renewable energy sources generated more electricity than fossil fuels on a global scale, easily meeting or exceeding demand growth in most places. As a result, total emissions have plateaued. That's the good news. But, well, I think that what this shows is that while we have, this shows that we do have the uh, the capacity, the technology, the economic viability to completely switch to clean and renewable energy. But what's happening instead is that in the interest of profits, um, many U.S. corporations are following the federal government's lead and retreating from their commitments to reduce environmental harm. So here's just one notable example. So on October 28th of last year, we had Hurricane Melissa. It ripped through Jamaica, record-breaking wind speeds that can only be produced by atmospheric and oceanic warming, causing that caused an estimated $8.8 billion in damage, which is 41%, about 41% of that country's GDP. But that very same day, Bill Gates, he published a document in which he downgraded climate change as an issue of importance after having been, after he had previously acknowledged, at least on a surface level, the seriousness of this since he was pushed to do so back in 2006. And he just said, oh, no, we don't have to worry about it anymore. And clearly we do. And now coal and um, so coal and natural gas is something that can cause even more destruction of both the environment and human health than we thought. It's sometimes presented as, especially with natural gas, they um, it was originally presented as like a better alternative, but um, the death and destruction that result from first of all, when it comes to coal, the death and destruction that result from burning it are, that's quite plain to see, right? It pumps copious amounts of CO2 and other greenhouse gases directly into the atmosphere, causing the temperatures to rise and generating things like acid rain, smog, other forms of toxic pollution. And this pollution has very severe impacts on human health. The ash produced by burning coal often contains heavy metals and other toxic substances, and this can disperse in the air as fly ash from a coal power plant. And the solids left in the furnace are then often discarded unsafely, allowing it to leak right in back into the environment, right? Um, and now we have a situation where about 9 million people are killed every single year worldwide by the noxious emissions of carbon combustion. And that accounts for approximately 1 in 5 deaths overall. Out of the, and one example to show how just how bad this is, one out of the 5 million school children in New Delhi, about half are believed to have permanent irreversible lung damage from growing up immersed in this kind of pollution. Now, for a long time, um, as I mentioned, natural gas was assumed to be cleaner and greener and all of that. But then more research has proven that it is actually just as dangerous in its own way. And while natural gas combustion doesn't, release, as much like CO2 as coal, and it still, it doesn't like, it's not as obvious in these big black, plumes and all of that. It still produces enough of the CO2 to contribute substantially to the same pollution and climate problems. And moreover, the thing with natural gas, um, first of all, the extraction often is done through fracking, as well as the processing, piping, and transport. They're all prone to leaking methane or methane, however you want to say it, which traps heat about 80 times more effectively than CO2. So just, defeats the whole, right? The whole thing. Um, and Reliance on fossil fuels enriches some of the world's worst capitalists. It drives the imperialism and the imperialist aspirations of many capitalist states, um, and perpetuates nonstop war and genocide. Um, War and the maintenance of an active military, it is absolutely one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gases. Um, and the U.S. military alone emits more of these gases than many whole countries do. Another cause for concern now is the building of data centers that require vast amounts of electric power. I mentioned how like the energy demand continues to rise. It's a big, big driver of that. Way more than just like the individual, people, consumers, right? It's the corporations. In the US, much of this power is expected to come from fossil fuel combustion and new nuclear power plants. And and these data centers are disproportionately being located near working class neighborhoods and communities of color, right? The ones who will be most affected. Um, it's more things like environmental racism are happening around this, right? Um, there are numerous examples over the years of American oil companies operating internationally, trying to control as many reserves and dominate as many markets as possible, creating and heavily influencing political developments in this whole process. Just to name a few, we have Standard Oil of New Jersey, and its successor brands Esso and Exxon. They've been in South America since 1911. Yeah, exactly. I was right. I think you know what that means. The Pan American Petroleum and Transport Company, which was later absorbed into Standard Oil of Indiana, which then turned into Amoco, right? They started messing around in Mexico and Venezuela starting in 1916. There's the American Consortium, Aramco, which started in Saudi Arabia in 1933. And that's an event that has fundamentally shaped much of modern geopolitics. It's a huge deal. Um, Oil exploration and extraction was being carried out in Nigeria for several decades during the colonial period, led by the British giants Shell and BP. And then as that period came to a close, you had these American oil companies rushing in, and they've been causing all kinds of extreme problems there since then. They're ongoing. More on that later. Um, and more recently, uh, oil was again the key factor in the US's invasion, war, and occupation of Iraq, right? So those are only, there's way more examples, and those are just a few. And now oil's central role in some of the world's worst developments, it just continues. Obviously, now there's the war in Iran, and you know there's many issues with oil around that. The big one that I think you hear a lot about is, the Strait of Hormuz is such a crucial focal point because it's the most important route for shipping oil out of the Middle East, and therefore the most important maritime transport route for oil in the entire world. Over 20 million barrels passing through every single day. Um, and things, as we've seen, they really escalated because it was, when profits were threatened, right? Um, the then the genocide in Gaza, I think that's really important to mention. It's an aspect of it that I think isn't mentioned enough. That one of I'll call them the Zionist entities' major aims is to access oil reserves just offshore from the Strip. It's one of the big motivations for it. The whole genocide to just get rid of all the people there for that reason. Um, and the role of Saudi Arabia and its oil-based ties to the U.S. Continues to this day. Obviously, we're seeing it um, constantly with terrible consequences for the entire region. Um, Oil and gas is also the backbone of Russia's economy, and it has played a huge part in that government's military operations and its imperialist aspirations as a whole. The war in Ukraine is directly and really mostly funded by this oil money. It goes right into it. Um, Similarly, oil and gas in Azerbaijan's, primary funding source for its armed conflict with Armenia. The problems caused by oil in Nigeria that I mentioned, they're still ongoing. The Niger Delta region, in particular, in the south of the country, it's a prime example of what some people call a resource curse, where and this is really a major symptom of capitalism, where foreign corporations, they come in, they extract obscene amounts of wealth for themselves, because these natural resources there, these rich natural resources, they extract all the wealth from there for themselves, while the local population gets none of the benefit and all of the harm. In fact, despite being so economically productive and resource rich, the Niger Delta region is Nigeria's poorest and most polluted region. And that is the very definition of a resource curse. And again, that is a product of capitalism. Um, then, of course, there's Venezuela. Obviously, oil has been a central motive behind the U.S. invasion and coup there. Um, of course, the impact of the fossil fuel industry, it hits closer to home as well. It's not just, in faraway places, from our perspective here in North America. Um, in addition to polluting, the pollution and the general environmental destruction that it causes, um, this industry is also a direct cause of much oppression and harm of indigenous people all around North America. Um, Large intensive extraction sites, refineries, pipelines, and more, it terribly impacted the environment, as well as many indigenous lands and communities across Canada and the US, as do coal and uranium mines as well, causing a lot of similar problems. So, just to conclude things here, the U.S. Doubling down on its addiction to fossil fuels, it really it spells nothing but disaster, especially considering just like the position of the U.S. Worldwide. It has very serious consequences. Now, despite the overall gains being made internationally, the U.S. is it's still it's deliberately holding back progress. it's solely in the interest of protecting and promoting the profits of uh, this type of energy industry that is, very much due for its downfall at this point. Clearly, like it just should naturally be going away now, right? But it's not because of capitalism. Um, and in order to really transition the way that we need to, the system has to change. While the have these positive changes on the global scale, they're encouraging. The climate situation, though, remains so dire. It's extremely dire, and much more work needs to be done to avoid an eventual profit-driven climate apocalypse, and it needs to happen quickly. We can't wait. Um, we're still way too close to projected climate thresholds. Crossing these thresholds could trigger disastrous runaway changes, like a domino effect in the climate. To avoid reaching that point, we still need a much more aggressive shift away from fossil fuels. This will not be possible as long as the U.S. continues to hold out what it's doing, let alone regressing toward heavier reliance on fossil fuels. And ultimately, the problem here is it's the capitalist system at the root of all of this. And it has never been more plainly obvious that the fossil fuel industry, it only really still exists to make as much profit as possible for its own executives. To them, the advent of clean and renewable energy is the most serious threat to that objective. Um, as these better forms of energy have rapidly become more dominant worldwide in recent years, the American fossil fuel industry and its close friends in the federal government have reacted by defensively, digging in and reasserting their power through things like the so-called big beautiful bill, right? Big bill. Uh, it's literally killing us. So as our FSP comrade Steve Hoffman says in his pamphlet, which you should definitely get, called Eco Socialism, the solution for survival on planet Earth. Um, he says that he makes the great point that energy corporations have the political power to make sure that capitalist governments do not require them to shift to renewables until the last oil well is dry and the last piece of shale is fracked. And we must make sure that this never happens.
Right.
We don't have time to waste. And the only true solution to this problem is the replacement of capitalism with socialism on a global scale. One of our most fundamental demands to to nationalize energy under workers' control, also indigenous and community control. This is something that capitalism will never allow, but it is something that we absolutely need for our collective survival. So as such, it's a strong transitional demand, meaning it's something that pushes us toward the necessity for the working class, the necessity, pushes us toward the necessary working class revolution. Um, and to advance toward this goal of a socialist, feminist, and eco-socialist revolution, we need to build an international working class united front that includes people from all over the world and here in the US as well, both together. It includes organized labor, indigenous people, and environmentalists from a wide range of movements and more. Again, as we as a civilization have the technology and all the means to run on 100% clean and renewable energy, but we need socialism in order to make that a reality. Otherwise, it's not going to happen.
Right on.
So
Right on.
that's it.
Thank you so much, Sam, for your insight and your thoughts on where we need to focus the struggle. Before we get into discussion, I'm gonna just do a quick fun pitch. So the Freedom Socialist Party, who sponsored this event, is a, you know, we are like a volunteer revolutionary run organization. Um, if we were a nonprofit, we wouldn't be able to hold the kinds of events like we are having here today. And events like this cost money, from rent on our hall to keeping up our technology to putting together the tasty snack plates that we have. So if you are able, please donate to the Freedom Socialist Party. I believe Norma is putting a link in the chat for our friends online. And if you aren't donating cash or a check, this is something that our cashier can help you with as you are tallying up.
But not Bitcoin.
No, I don't think we do Bitcoin. Bitcoin is also really bad for the environment.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, because it basically what it's doing is trying to find like certain kinds of numbers, and so that takes a lot of computing power. And so, as with just like AI, it's like these are, things that take a lot of computing power, and things that take a lot of computing power take a lot of energy and also produce a lot of waste that just so happens to end up in, working class and poor communities. So, I mean, it really is all connected.
Yeah, wastes a lot of electricity and a lot of water
A lot of clean water
because they need that for like just
to
to
cool the machines.
yeah, because otherwise it can combust because it's like this thing's overheat so much.
All right. And then I will, of course, allow people to continue with generous donations, but we can begin to move into discussion. So if you are in person, please raise your hand. And if you are online, please use the raise hand function. And then Norma will let me know that you're raising your hand. All right. I think I saw Paul.
I was just looking to say.
Okay. Then I think I saw Moises.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sam, for your presentation, and Christina as the MC today. I just, of course, took a quick read of your article from the Free Socialist newspaper February issue. I think much of what you covered today is also related to your important article in the newspaper. Two things. One is, could you comment on a little bit more on what we're seeing every day in the news with this war in Iran that the U.S. is conducting, and how that relates to energy and petroleum. And you mentioned the 20 million barrels of oil going through the Strait of Hormuz daily. Could you say a little bit more about how that relates to the balance of, on the positive side, the more use of solar and wind energy, and at the same time, over addiction? You use the word addiction, I like that. The addiction still on petroleum. So if you could just comment more on that, what do we see besides the gas prices that people who drive cars, still use gasoline, how do you see that as an analyst of the environment, I'm not sure if I'm being clear, but basically, what is the balance based on what we're actually seeing on so much reliance on oil, with this warning rod? Then the last thing is, yeah, if you could just, I understand from my own learning, outside of today's event, that less than 1% of the world's, water that is not frozen in the poles, North Pole and especially the South Pole, less than 1% is fresh water. I thought it was more than 1%, but it may be less than 1% of all the world's rivers and lakes and all that is fresh water. And if you could comment a little bit on the fact that not just the data centers, for computers and software and all that, what do you how do you see, the water factor in addition to pollution related to oil? Want to take some or?
Do you want to answer that, or should
Yeah.
I take some more questions?
I mean, I can, yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, so I mean, first of all, again, like talking about the war in Iran, I mean, that is, um, we've had with that sort of the crisis that it had there that, produced it's the worst oil shock that, even worse than the one in the 70s. Um, I think that does I think that is really a symptom of this we're really like the capitalist system really holding on to this reliance on fossil fuels so much. I mean, um, that we wouldn't be um, from the beginning, like the conflict, this all these conflicts around that, like wouldn't even be happening if we weren't relying on oil in the first place. I mean, that is really like the most fundamental truth. And I think so. I think what it says is like, um, and the fact that there is still so much like that there's still this like energy, like all that energy that I mentioned that's being all the oil that's being shipped out, like, um, that we're still doing so much of that. And this oil is then being shipped. I mean, that route, it mainly goes to the Asian market through the Strait of Hormuz. Um, yeah, like China's the biggest one, the recipient of that. It's like 30 something percent. Um, but then, uh, so then that then proliferates, more of that pollution, right? Like, there's like, um, until we have like, um capitalism is just going to always encourage that's the thing. It's like it's always going to encourage this reliance and stop, countries, whether it's the US or China or any country, from moving to renewable and clean energy that then like, stops like the need to even like have these issues around like, um the transport of oil out of the Middle East, right? Um, I don't know if that makes sense. It's a big issue, but yeah, I don't know. It's just my thought right now. But, um, and like talking about water, um, well, that's interesting because I think that water is not being used in the right way. It's not being used enough. It could be used to produce more energy, um, but things like hydropower, it's one of the things that's being cut because of this pressure from the um, fossil fuel industry. Um, it should be expanding, but it's not. And meanwhile, it's being wasted on things like the data centers, things like agribusiness, right? That um, where then these things that it's being used for is using like the electricity that's being used is like it's from the fossil fuels, right? So instead of the water itself being used for to produce clean energy, I mean, it's just like this whole chain of things, right? Um, and the of course we are facing just multiple issues with water around the world. I mean, there's um, continues to be a lack of clean drinking water across much of the world. Um, where that's another problem that we don't, that doesn't have to be that way. That can be solved, but capitalism just won't, it won't let it happen. Um, and then there's the sea level rise um, that is happening, which is seriously threatening a lot of things around the world. I wrote a whole article on that in the Freedom Socialist that you can read. Um, yeah, I mean, it just goes on and on with the water problems, but that's just what I'm thinking of right now. But
All right. We've got Christine with her hand up online, and then we'll have Amy and Bob.
Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate your thoughts and your analysis, and certainly agree that we have to stop capitalism in order to stop the myriad of problems that we're having in the world today. I also connect it to migrations across the world. With global warming and droughts in many parts of the world, people are being forced off of their land because they can't survive, and they're looking for places to go, to in order to take care of their families and to feed them and send them to school. One example would be Central America. The drought that they're having there has caused immense migrations north to the United States. We have people, lingering on the borders, and we have people who were able to cross the border being persecuted by the government, the corporate government that we have, and blaming them for, you know, problems that we're having in this economy. But, it just so ass backwards, because here they are spending billions and billions of dollars to deport people, to build places to house them in jails and send them across the country, building the border wall. Um, Instead of taking that money and working against global warming, there would probably be a reverse migration, because I don't believe a lot of people who migrate really want to um, go move from their homes, where they were born, where their culture is. Sure, some of them do, but I think if we were to ameliorate, if that's the right word, global warming, a lot of people would return to their normal homes and be productive there. So, and AI is really pretty vicious in destroying the environment, and particularly putting their plants in places of people of color, and poisoning their atmosphere. So it's something, really egregious that we need to stand up and fight against while we're looking to overturn capitalism. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you, Christine. Amy.
Thanks. I'm Amy with the Bay Area Freedom Socialist Party. Sam, I really appreciate this. It's so much food for thought. Um, but I'm struck by the fact that with what you've said and then what comments have been made in discussion and, other things that we hear, there is a lead to follow here, which I think is really important. I completely agree that this has to be an anti-capitalist movement. There's no other way about that. And I think that a lot of people see that in this country and around the world. And the reality is that women all over the world, especially women of color and Native women, as Christine mentioned, are in the thick of this fight and are, have nothing to lose. They have everything to gain. It's really life and death because we know women are hit the hardest by environmental illness and poverty and food insecurity and the water issue itself. I mean, imagining, some women having to travel miles to get water. And so the fight back is there. And I think, our job in this country is to do both, have the international solidarity with those struggles and really promote those struggles, and promote the fact that it is women leading the way because of material conditions, and also do what you're talking about, push back on these US corporations. They're not only US corporations, but let's face it, that's, we're the belly of the beast for a reason, and do that work here. And, it's a big task, but I appreciate that what you're making the point is we're already in the streets against the war in Iran. We want to be in the streets against the war in Ukraine. We've been in the streets, for Palestinian survival. All of these things. No one doesn't know that they're connected. Hardly anyone doesn't know that it's a crumbling economic system that's just grasping at the last possible straws. And so, knowing that there's a leadership of youth and women that's already happening here, Cancer Alley in this country, there's been a lot of, movements to reclaim native lands that have been successful, not successful enough, but these are things that are happening. And so, to me, it's really heartening that there is some momentum to grab onto, and the class consciousness of working and poor people around the world, and the fact that we just can't live like this anymore, and literally people are dying. The silver lining to that is the fact that the only thing there is to do is to overturn the system, and there's movement toward that. So I really appreciate you making the systemic connection between all of these things, because if we don't do that, we're overwhelmed by 1,000 issues that are, killing everybody. And if we do it, it's our work to do in this country to really create that united front, create that multi-issue movement. But I think it's about leadership, and I think it's about really just continuing to propagate these ideas and find who's willing to be out there, to be the spokespeople and the leaders and the pushers and the movers and shakers. So it's a big task, but in a lot of ways, I think if we keep up what we need to be doing, we're closer than day to day we might realize. And that, again, it's a lot of bad news, but there is a silver lining. So appreciate so much your you covered a lot of territory and a lot of really education for all of us. Thank you.
Yes. Bob?
Yeah. Thanks, Sam, for the talk. I agree with everyone on, it's really nice to have this information all be synthesized together in one presentation, give us a lot to show the connection of what to think about. And I appreciate, like Amy said, and speaking of silver linings, the fact that there's a poster right near Amy, Stand Up for Science, right? I mean, scientifically, we have the ability to switch to sustainable energy. I mean, it's there, and that's what's really encouraging. And the fact that, as Amy said, people are rising up and joining and uniting together to fight the system that says we can't do it, and that actually denies science. I mean, and denies that there's global warming, denies that vaccines can protect us from the worst diseases. We're now seeing, a resurgence of polio and measles and all these other diseases, right? And I also, in line with that, I just want to point out, so the mainstream media doesn't talk about how global warming is connected to fossil fuels because, I mean, the media is owned by, so that's why it all comes back to capitalism. The media is owned by the big corporations. The big corporations are not going to let their media companies tell us that there's this connection. They're going to try to deny it. But yet we see super monsoons that have never been precedented before happening right now. We just had the warmest March in the Western United States, right? So, I mean, all the evidence lies in the face of these denials. I also thank you for bringing up how oil has been used as a reason to fight wars, but we're also seeing petroleum and other fossil fuels being used now as political tools to punish countries like Cuba as being strangled energy wise. China, I think, is in a good way. It's helping with more solar panels and things like that for Cuba. So maybe you can say a little bit about that. And then, there was the embargo against Russia. U.S. tried to keep people from getting Russian oil, and the Europeans are not buying Russian natural gas and all those other things. So, I mean, so not only is fossil fuel a big moneymaker for them, but it's also this weapon, this power lever that they can use. And I wanted to ask you one other thing too. I mean, often we hear, especially with the rise of data centers needed for AI and for cryptocurrency, people are saying, "Oh, well, we'll just build nuclear plants for that." And so I want to hear what you have to say about that. So thank you.
Okay, and then I believe that Denise has her hand up online.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Well, great job, Sam, gathering all of this information and reflections together. I think that the emphasis on capitalism is like critically important in this discussion. And I'm just thinking about how part of why that's the case is just considering that if we were to simply just pursue more renewable energy, we could easily just reproduce the same imperialist, exploitation and resource extraction that we see now that's so devastating. I'm thinking about how renewable technologies still rely on mining, much of which happens in the global south. And so the question I'm landing on, which maybe is me grasping for hope in like a bleak moment in time. I'm finding myself wondering about whether anyone is aware of maybe some example of, I'm thinking about like what are our alternatives going to look like? And I'm imagining like maybe a cooperative, like an energy cooperative, or another kind of model that would embody the socialist values that we've been talking about. And if we don't have an answer right on the tip of the tongue, I'm definitely going to research this because I'm just curious, and I bet that it exists. But I guess if we aren't aware of a concrete, like, go over in Portland, they're doing this, like maybe we could dream about it for a second, like what alternative systems, we would begin to create.
Okay, I'm gonna call on myself before I turn it back over to Sam. So, first off, I want to thank Sam for another slam and talk. You've given us a lot of like, really excellent food for thought. And then to build on your points and some of the points that others have raised, capitalists and imperialists have been shifting the blame for environmental devastation to individuals and working people. Like my whole life, Sam's whole life, there's been a really big push on like what you need to do to save the planet. And then when you find out that the US military is the world's largest polluter, that the plastic industry knew that plastic was not recyclable and still insisted on making it about, you need to sort this in the right bin. Oh, this is a better, thing to use to keep there from being garbage. Um, you know, it's capitalists and elites creating the most pollution, with their private jets and their, corporations and all of that. And then also our power companies doing a horrible job of maintaining and improving the infrastructure. And so, these are things that we can fight for. And this is why I was glad to find out that there is a push for San Franciscans to take over PG&E because like I used to live in Sacramento, and SMUD, which is the utility company up there, is publicly owned. And, just like in Seattle, they've got, Seattle, their light. Wait, no, that's not a, yeah,
too, yeah.
yeah. And then when you have, publicly owned utilities, there is often a ability to request that your energy come from sustainable sources. And so while we don't necessarily have the power as individuals that the capitalists like to blame us for, like, like we individually are responsible for each and every dolphin choking on a, plastic ring. Meanwhile, like nobody wants to take charge of, the climate change, like this, that's one way that we can make an impact by demanding more control and accountability from, the corporations that are producing our power.
Um, so yeah, I can go ahead and I think, first of all, you mentioned nuclear power. Um, and that, well, I mentioned one thing related to that. That's one of the problems with nuclear power, which is the uranium mining, um, which causes a huge amount of environmental destruction and just very dangerous. I mean, this stuff is, we're talking about radioactive materials and all of that. And it's one of the things that is really, in a big way, directly affecting a lot of particular communities, and especially in indigenous communities. It's one of the biggest impacts. Um, so there's that. There's the mining, but it doesn't stop there. Then you have once you mine it, but then you start like using it for the plants, and there's all kinds of things that can happen, all kinds of environmental risks, and the pollution that can leak out, or you can even is dumped. Um, and it's like, say, if we have power plants around here, like there would be a lot of waste that can be dumped into the ocean. That has happened a lot with nuclear power plants. It's a problem in Japan. It's a big problem in Japan. Um, you see there's a group even here that does like protests at the Japanese consulate in Japantown over this issue. It's really serious, and um, so it is one of those things where, yeah, it's not like all like the same problems as burning like coal or all of that, but it creates major other ones. Like it's a whole set of other problems. So like um I think that is not where we need to go. More you know, solar and wind and and hydropower when it's done the right way is really good as well. Things like that. And um, then I think the key is, the question was like, how are we going to, is this just going to produce the same problems? And I think no, because when we are like talking about like the truly renewable energy, um, like solar, for example, things that like um, the sun power is not like a resource that we're going to be fighting wars over. I don't know if that makes sense, but like it's, um, that big burning ball in the sky is going to be there. Um, yeah, and then also the other key piece is not only just things being renewable, and therefore, you deal with that sort of scarcity resource problem, which under capitalism deals, it leads to. I did this weird like dyslexic switching the D and the L and you shouldn't deal, but anyway, leads to um so much of this war and all the problems that it um like it needs to be under workers' control. That is a huge, huge, huge fundamental piece. It needs to be under workers' community control and also indigenous control as well. They need to be, all those are the people that need to be involved in like controlling everything, right? It's not the corporations. So if we actually control it, and if it's fully, public, and worker owned, um, then that really does eliminate the the problems that we see that stem from the energy leading to all of these all this death and destruction. And we can actually manage it ourselves for our own benefit, for like our needs. And the point is not to generate profits. When you eliminate that, then the whole idea of continuing to rely on fossil fuels is ridiculous when you eliminate the profit motive. Don't we just throw out that bullshit and get down to what we really need? It's basically what that
Yeah.
collective ownership.
Yes.
Yeah.
Norma.
Hi, I'm Norma. Thank you so much, Sam, for this very like it's tragic, it's terrible, but then there is like a lot of hope. I'm saying this because as I went to the south to Louisiana where there's a 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi from between Baton Rouge to New Orleans called Cancer Alley. I mean, all of this is connected. It is gentrified in New Orleans, and as folks from San Francisco who've been here since the 70s, 80s, whatever, like it's the same in any city where the poorest of the poor, and these are Black folk in the South that have been dealing with this, and even for those of us who've gone in the FSP, even yesterday to the Bayview district where the U.S. Navy has not cleaned up their radiation sites, but we're passing leaflets, we're meeting people. They have family members who have emphysema, and it's largely a Black, brown immigrant community that has not been listened to. So all of this to say is that during my travels, this was about 2 weeks ago. I sat at a table and met this young man who was an engineer, an energy engineer, and he was attending the American Association of Blacks in Energy, which is a 49th national conference in New Orleans, and got to talking about this talk and invited him, wasn't able to make it because he's doing a lot of energy work, but just the notion of that they were going to be talking about these issues, and just from what you said, Sam, that we need a workers controlled um in energy source, and like what are we doing, as the scientists and engineers who are working on this. And I love with what Christina had to say, because it's always the personal individual's fault that is being blamed under the system. But would love to know more about just other things you might have heard in regards to like making compost in the plastics, like these kinds of things. But I love with what you had to say. I feel like I had recently also gone to a climate change thing that San Francisco main library was putting, and it said nothing about the profit system. It said nothing about capitalism.
Of course.
What you gave, I think, is an answer to exactly, this not just the capitalists and the elites, but the progressives and the liberals who really should get to this other point of saying that it is our system, and not just bringing in the aspect of the earth and the people and the love and harmony and all that. But I love the talk. It was great. It was excellent, and would love to hear more about your thoughts on like other renewable things like that I've heard on. If you've heard anything about it.
All right, I also see Nancy.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, so much for that talk. I'm sitting here just like, wow, so many different things. And what you did so well was really expose the interconnectedness of everything, which is so important because we do have a tendency, because frankly, the society wants us to see everything as separate. If we see everything as separate, it becomes incredibly overwhelming because it's just one more thing, one more thing. But by posing it as interconnected, then we're like, oh, okay, this is just some more shit that they're doing. And cause. Where's the root cause? Because if we just say, oh, that group is doing that, this other group, that then it becomes like, whoa, we're just, in an avalanche under all this horrible stuff. The other thing that you made me think of is the whole idea, in addition to everything you've said, the idea that if we had a better public transit system, if we had more things that were more community based or more group oriented, then of course you're going to save energy, right? Because then not everybody's in their cars, right? Not everybody's taking an Uber or a Waze or whatever. A Waymo. Waze is money. But anyway, so I'm just, again, that's yet another aspect, right, which I think is really interesting. I was wondering two things. If you could talk a little bit more specifics in terms of when we talk about worker control, because I think that and indigenous, communities control, how does that look like? If you might, share some of your own sort of thoughts on that, because again, I think that helps us, well, one, focus on the positive, but also kind of gives us a little bit better understanding of what that is, and why we call for that. So how do you envision that looking like? And I know there's lots of answers, but we get to dream a little and also be practical at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I think, well, I mean, Norma mentioned, the problem of a lot of these groups don't like go far enough. They might see like maybe some individual issues, but then they don't connect it to the larger issue of capitalism. And I think that Nancy, what you said is really like what I thought of in response to that actually is like huge part of it is that making all of the connections. Um, the what we call like the multi-issue politics, like um if we can, you know, connect all of these things together, um then people in really all across the movements can then see like, oh, this is like this problem with energy then affects like this other problem that also care about. And the more that you do that, then the closer it brings you to um, this realization that it's systemic. It's like the whole system. It's all connected as a product of the system that we have, and that's ultimately what needs to change. Um, and then the other thing that we can talk to people about is the workers and community control. And yeah, like you said, that can look, like many different ways to do that. But I think on a basic level, I see that more as like things becoming more like locally managed. First of all, I think like the sort of move that um, we have, which goes only part of the way, obviously, but like the move from independence from PG&E in a certain location. I mean, that is a good starting place, I think. But what under workers' control, though, like that's really like in a certain area, it's people will. What I see is like um, instead of decisions being made by some kind of corporation or by like um, just uh, kind of like a group that's sort of like above everybody, right? Like how it is now. Um, that the uh, control and management of resources can be done, collectively through actual community councils, um, where that have like actual representation of an entire, like all the people that are using the energy in that area that we have to say, right? Um, and so it's not going to be like, you know, one person calling the shots like we have with, these CEOs. Like that's done. It would transfer more to like everybody makes decisions together. Um, through I think my vision would be, energy like workers energy councils in, you know, that are like locally based. So each, communities can manage their own. Um, but yeah, there's a, that's I think a good conversation that we should be having. Like, what does this actually look like? Um, and and I think a big important point is that it does need to include, really make sure that it includes a whole, cross section of that community. Um,
All right, Julie.
Yeah, I'm just curious. I don't know if anybody knows about these big cities like the example of Sacramento and Los Angeles having public utilities, right? They've gotten away from this corporate model. And even those municipalities, if they have any structure set up for community input, I mean, if the energy company, so to speak, is publicly owned, is there any kind of structure that's been set up for different, you know, groups in the community being able to give input on the management of these publicly owned energy entities? And something that's just fascinating on the local level to see what can be done, even if it's incrementally getting more structures in place for community input.
yeah.
Um,
That's one of my hopes when I heard that like, maybe that will open the door to more, like San Franciscans being able to show up instead of having
we
like,
have some impact.
yeah. Because I mean, when you talk about PG&E, they're just making their decisions in their own boardrooms, and
Right,
the
shut off.
building that we can't access will get tackled by security if we try to go in there, right? So, having it being done at public meetings at City Hall where we can show up,
Yeah, there's gotta be, that's a
you know,
structure.
yeah, yeah, it's a big deal.
All right. I heard that Christine has her hand up, and then we got Paul.
Yeah, got it. Recently, I heard a lot of organizing going on in communities in Maine and the Northeast who are organizing against AI facilities in their communities. You know, because of the overuse of water. The heat that these facilities generates can be really detrimental to the environment. And people are really, it's a positive thing to see people organizing to protect their communities. And it gives me hope, just like seeing all the people out on the streets fighting against war and, genocide. So I have some good feelings about things that are happening to change things. But I think we also need to really encourage people to uh, participate in organizing in these different instances, or find a group to work with, and, put your energy into working communally. Join the FSP, work with us. I live in Monterey, but I get all these signal messages about my comrades going out in the streets and demonstrating, and it makes me so proud. I'm getting pretty old, and it's hard for me to get out. But I think inviting people to join us, that's really important. Thank you.
I agree.
Okay, are there any more comments? Oh, yes,
Yeah.
Paul.
Yeah, we're fragmented in a lot of ways. Even oversight groups that are supposedly drawn from the community, PUC, that's regulated. Years ago, I knew a lawyer who worked for the PUC, and her point of view was entirely about how to maximize shareholder profit. But and this is over 40 years ago. Uh, we see, I was just looking up here, what's happening in the northern region of Canada, some of which is truly excellent, and some of which has to do with how to mine gold and build a link. The biggest new project is to make it an export for natural gas through the opening up of the Northwest Passage as the ice recedes. So here locally, we've never had a good integration, even of the public transit that we have. So that it's not easy for someone. It's going to be a little bit easier to get, say, from the airport to BART, onto BART, and from BART onto Muni, and so on, the state transit systems. But it was never as well planned as it is in a lot of other places in the world where governments were somehow responsive, yeah, to the people, where the airport has a train station, and the integration is really quite seamless if you look at use that in other places. One of the innovations that surprised me when I learned about it was in the city of Basel in Switzerland. We just happened to know the retiring guy who was running the energy program for the whole city. And I learned that the heat, so it's cold there, that the heat comes on common water mains that come from boilers that are fueled by the clippings from the protected watershed for the drinking water, as it falls on the earth, and the filtration through the earth and so on. And then for a long time, just that alone, the burning of the pruning and the management of the forests, which are not large in Switzerland, it's a small country, and a lot of it's not arable. But that was enough to pipe the water through into every home and apartment in the city of Basel, like electricity came through the wires and drinking water came through the mains. So did high temperature water come to their heat registers. And I don't know where, I know that it has to be paid for. It's metered for each home, like our electricity and water are. I don't know where the money goes, but it's definitely a project out of the city itself. There's a lot of ways that are maybe attainable for things to be push into integration. I don't know how far it's finally forced to put a train station in its obscure place in the airport. That's not the easiest place to get to, but it's doable. In Chicago, there's the blue line that goes out to the airport. I used it once or twice. It's not incredibly convenient. Again, it's a remote connection to the terminals. There's lots of things that could be done that science has answers for. They're fragmented because of the fragmentation of community groups wanting to guard their power from each other. So instead of having a Bay Area Transit Authority, we've got SFMTA, we've got whatever different East Bay Transit and BART and so on. So all of them duplicate services, duplicate administration, and waste a lot of money that way. So there's things that can be done. Well, we're hoping for and working towards something more radical and fundamental. There's things that are not superficial, that have enough of an impact by being changed that could be pursued.
Yeah.
And I don't know where the motivation comes from to do that.
I'm happy to see that there's a growing movement towards getting rid of PG&E, and that's like a whole issue, but therefore I think doable actually.
Yeah.
And good examples. I had no idea that Sacramento had a public utility. So there's already role model, right? It's not like rocket science. We can do this.
I agree.
And I just wanted to say, well researched, Sam. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to do my last call for questions online or in person. Amy?
Oh, this is so much more food for thought. Being on guard against the fact that a much bigger trend is the privatization of currently public resources. So, yeah, these are questions, how did LA do it? How, what's the history with, I mean, even the water in San Francisco is rapidly being privatized, but at one time it was entirely privatized. So at one time we, got it away from Spring Valley Water Company and made it public. So I think this is really helpful to think at the local level, what can be done. Because even if it's just to stave off any further privatization, that's a huge thing that we need to be focused on. It's not the end all be all, but we've got to be focused on something. I really appreciate what
I agree that like it's a step to get away from the privatization. I think then ultimately, like the threat of privatization will persist even when you make something public. It'll try to like, get a stake back into it. So I think that's where ultimately like the system does have to change in order to make it like truly public, right? Because under capitalism, it's like going public can only go so far. Right, we see this in some municipal things like where people might have some input, but the private interests are still way too involved. But switching from like PG&E to a city thing would be a huge step, in the right direction.
Yeah. Lots of stuff, it's cross currents, different things happening in one direction and the other. And then we just had a billionaire buy the mayor's office.
It's all true. It's all happening.
All right, Moises.
Yeah, I'm also, I'm sorry to introduce myself earlier, supported the FSP for a long time. And I am a retired public employee, City of Oakland, over 30 years. And I just wanted to say my experience in public works and all that as a union activist there, that they're in a for-profit private property system like we have in the United States and in California still. There's always going to be that pressure to privatize public services. And I myself went through several reorganizations and reshuffling of destruction of departments and creation of new ones. And I think that that's an important thing to say, because the regular reasoning that the elected officials at the times. I went through 4 mayors, I think 4 or 5 mayors, over the 33 years that I was in Oakland. That there would the common theme was, well, we're going to privatize architectural services so that it can become more efficient because if we have city architectural services in public works, it's not efficient enough. You know, city workers are too lazy. They take things for granted and blah 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 blah. So yeah, right, exactly. That's what we said as workers. It's like
straight up not true.
correct.
Yeah.
And if there are inefficiencies, we as working people would be the first to step up and say, I think this is how we could do it better because we want to succeed. We must succeed. We want to serve the community. That's why we became public servants and blah, blah, blah. So I just want to balance that with what has already been said because it's not just that we can solve things within the context of a profit making system because there will always be that pressure against us making those solutions and to keep them.
Yeah, definitely.
And I say that with a lot of passion because I lived it. It's not only because I learned about it by reading important things by Mark and Engels and Zetkin and others.
Exactly. Thank you. I couldn't agree more.
Good job, Christina.
All right. And then I want to bring it back to Sam so that they can bring it home if they've got any additional things to add.
I mean, one of the things that I was going to conclude on, I mean, they were kind of just brought out right now, like how, like the reasons why we need to keep going um, until the system is completely changed to socialism worldwide. Because we just take half measures and think we can just stop there. First of all, it's not going to solve the whole problem, and then you will experience these reversals if the profit system is allowed to survive. It will attack. It will, and especially if it's like a sort of like you're fighting gamers here, but it's like you're fighting a boss that like you do some damage, but then it like reaches that second phase, right? Because you haven't killed it, right? I mean, you have to actually kill it, so it doesn't like keep fighting back and lashing out, right? Um, and when you take these kind of maybe just sort of making something public, it can actually make these private interests sort of like fight even harder. So you have to watch out for that because if you're gonna like say switch over from PG&E to the public utility, we better be ready because they're gonna like be on the offensive to try and take that power back. And until we actually change the whole system, that's what we're going to deal with on and on and on and on, and we're never going to reach, what we really need. That's really my conclusion.
Well, I want to thank you again, Sam, for an incredible talk with a lot of food for thought. It is always helpful to, hear from folks who have thought deeply about this because the capitalists and imperialists want us to be in dismay about the environment and feel like there's nothing that we can do. And knowing that we can is amazing. And speaking of things that we can do, I want to thank all of our attendees today. Collectively, we have raised $415 from the fund pitch.